Hi everyone, my name is Manan Al-Faiz and you're watching From Scratch. On today's episode of From Scratch, we're making sourdough. We're going to give you a really cool tip for today. We're not actually making sourdough bread. We're going to make something out of a sourdough discard. I have a very special guest with me today. Her name is Chef Mariam. Hi Chef, how are you?
Hi Chef.
How are
Fine.
you? Thank you so much for being on today's episode. We're super excited.
My pleasure.
We have something very exciting to present. Could you give us a background about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Mariam. My passion in baking starts from since I was young, since 12 years. I like everything about baking and cooking. I love the science and behind the baking also.
I think we're very similar in that. Actually, Chef Mariam has always been a teacher here at GICA. She's been teaching sourdough for a very long time, so I would call Chef Mariam a connoisseur when it comes down to sourdough. And today, Chef Mariam is going to be with us to guide you through how to make a sourdough from scratch, a sourdough starter. And we're not going to be doing a typical thing, which is making sourdough bread. We're going to use the discard, which is otherwise thrown out in the trash, to give you guys an idea of what you could do with that discard, which I think is super interesting. What are we making for today?
Cake.
Yes,
Chocolate cake.
we're making a chocolate cake. Isn't that, I think, everyone's favorite thing to eat, a chocolate cake? But for today, we're going to include a sourdough discard, which in my opinion really changes the texture, changes the whole game with a chocolatey cake. You've tried it yourself, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, so
It's amazing.
it is really great. So to start off, what we're going to do is start with our sourdough starter from scratch. So for that, what you're going to need is an apple. We're going to need some water and some bread flour. Super simple, very easy, just 3 ingredients. And Chef Mariam actually told me that you don't have to use an apple. So could you explain?
We can do the starter without apple, just water and flour.
Yes.
Mixing them and let them for 1 day left on the counter. And then an environment like 25 Celsius in room temperature. And then let it ferment for 1 day. Then you have to discard and add another flour and water.
Yes, so
keep
feed it.
keep feeding it for 5 days.
Yes.
And it's ready between 5 to 7 days.
Yes. So our recipe is quite similar, except what we're doing is we're adding a bit of apple, and apple is going to add a lot of sweetness. It's going to kickstart that fermentation process, correct? So sourdough heavily depends on something called fermentation, and fermentation is the process where all of the sugars break down and start this process where bacteria start to form, which gives you the end result of a sourdough. Hence the name. It's called sour because of the reason why it turns from flour, water, and apple into something that's sour, something that's fermented, something that gives extra flavor.
The acids comes out from fermentation.
Exactly, which is otherwise known as yeast. So we're creating a yeast from scratch. So let's get started, Chef. Could we start by grating the apple? So could you help me with this?
Yeah.
Okay. So very simple. All you're doing is you are grating the apple into a bowl, and
Using half.
we're using the full piece of apple, depending on the size of apple that you have. I mean, for this recipe, it's very forgiving. You don't really have to measure out the apple. Super easy. Yeah, there you go. Thank you so much, Chef. So we've got the apple that is grated. And as you can tell, we use the bigger slots from a box grater. And what we're gonna do next is we're gonna grab the flour and get that mixed through. Yeah, perfect. There you go. Thank you. Let's give that a mix. So you're starting off with your apple that you grated. And chef, I think we could use any type of fruit, correct?
Yeah.
What different
raisins,
types?
and also pineapples. Yeah. we can-
And that would help.
Yeah.
But pineapples contain an enzyme that's a very sour enzyme, correct?
Yeah.
Does that really help the fermentation process, or how is it?
No, that's just for flavoring.
Okay, it's for flavoring. Okay,
Yeah.
that's really great. I mean, it's a lot of different fruits, a lot of different ingredients will give you different results. I think flour could also be substituted with other types of flour.
Yeah.
Right?
We can use whole wheat
Uh-huh.
or rye
Okay.
or bread flour.
Okay.
If every flour will behave
Different.
in ferment.
Exactly. So what we're going to do right now is we're just going to add in the water and give that a nice mix. And please do keep in mind that everything other than the apple, so our flour and the water is scaled using a kitchen scale, and that's heavily important for you always to keep in mind, because it's like a chemical process. It depends on these measurements, it depends on all of this. So we're just giving this a quick mix.
It will be like this shaggy.
Yes, exactly. So you're just making sure that you're mixing everything through. You don't want to knead everything for a long time. You don't want to knead at all, actually. What we're going to do right now is just make sure everything is mixed, and we're going to transfer this into our fermentation jar. Keep in mind that everything is measured. Our apple, except for our apple, it's not measured, but the flour and the water is measured. So chef, could you help us out by grabbing that jar? Let's transfer it right over here. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have a proper fermentation jar that is sterilized, correct?
Yes.
So chef, why do we have to sterilize our jar?
Because we don't have more organisms
Yes, exactly.
inside a bed or some.
Yes, exactly. So you're already starting to form some sort of bacteria, which is called our yeast. You don't want any unwanted bacteria forming. All you want is the bacteria that you will form. So you want to make sure everything is sterilized. Even our bowl is sterilized. All of our equipment is sterilized, just to make sure that we're creating a safe and proper environment. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is just transfer this into the bowl. This is going to be a bit tricky. Thank you, chef. This is going to be a bit tricky, but what you want to try to do is try not to soil any parts of the bowl or the container that you're going to ferment it in. Just to understand the level that you started with. Does that make sense, chef?
Yeah.
So you want to start off by understanding where your sourdough has started to gauge how much it has fermented or risen. So by doing that, you want a very clean container so you could see where you started off.
Actually, you will need another one to make it easy to transform the discard. If you discard from it,
Yes.
you will change
Soil, exactly, yes,
change
yes.
the jar to another one.
Exactly. So this is what you're going to start off with. You want to make sure that it's sealed tight. And from time to time, what you want to do is burp the container, which is a very weird name, burping, but it is a valid name, because what that means is you want to open it up slightly to release any built up gases. That's very important, because otherwise what's going to happen? It's going to explode. So please don't explode any jars at home. You want to make sure you burp this from time to time to release all of that built up gas. So what we're going to do is let this ferment on a counter for a total of 3 days. So for our sourdough for today, it takes a total duration of 5 days to make, and for you to actually use it, it takes 5 full days. For the first 3 days, what you want to make sure of is you ferment it untouched, just burping it from time to time to release all of that built up gas on a countertop at room temperature.
We can give it a stir actually.
Yes.
Also
Exactly.
between time to time.
Exactly.
And she's now a baby.
Yes.
After 5 days, she will be
Toddler.
ready and mature.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It is actually like a child. So treat her like a child, because sourdough tends at the first few days to die very quickly. So just be careful. What we're gonna do is let this ferment for 3 days, and we'll show you right after the break how to feed your dough after 3 days. Welcome back, everyone. So as I said, what we're going to show you right now is how to feed your dough. So what we have over here is our mixed sourdough that is supposed to be fermented for 3 days. But for us to show you how to feed your dough, this is a very important step. So your dough has fermented for 3 days. What you're going to do is open up the lid and discard half of the amount. So you're going to do this visually, and this is fine with doing that. If you want to go down with technicalities, you can measure out half to discard. So it's super easy, just like Chef Mariam is showing you. You're just going to remove it and discard it into a bowl. Our recipe for today is going to show you what you can do with the discarded amount. So I know, Chef, you do quite a lot of sourdough at home, and I know a lot of people that do make sourdough at home discard quite a lot of sourdough, and in my opinion that's quite a lot of waste. So our episode for today is here to show you that you could actually use this discarded amount. Don't throw it out in the trash. You can use it at home to make really delicious recipes out of it. So I'm just going to set this aside for now. I'm going to remove this. We're going to put it over here, and what we're going to do right now is show you how to feed your dough. So we've got a sourdough, which half of the amount is discarded. What we're gonna do is add in some extra flour and some extra water and mix it in the jar itself. So Chef, let's go ahead and do that. What we're gonna do is, you could go ahead with adding the flour, I'll add in the water. And again, this is all measured. It has to be measured because it is a chemical process, and measuring is very vital. You don't wanna mess up anything.
Yeah, you can measure the same amount of flour and this water. For example, if you are feeding it
Yes.
300 gram of flour, you add the same amount of water, 300 gram of water. That means the ratio of the feeding is 1 to 1.
Exactly, yes.
Related to the flour you
added. Exactly. I think there are many recipes for sourdough out there. Part of some easy sourdoughs that you could make at home could have ratios like this. This recipe right here is a bit, just a little bit different, just because we're also using some apples as well. I think Chef Mariam has a lot of different recipes that include not having any sort of fruit, apples, so on and so forth, and just having flour and water. And Chef, what does that recipe give us in terms of a difference between adding an apple or adding a fruit without adding an apple or a fruit?
It's about the recipes you are going to make. If you make cakes or sweet breads, like those brioche or the donut, sweet doughs, you can use the sweetness.
Okay.
Apple or sugar also, or honey. If you're using for savory, like bread, baguette or pizza or the artisan bread,
yes,
you can just use the
plain.
Yeah, the traditional one.
I agree with that actually. So basically, if you're making something that leans more onto a savory side, then Chef Mariam recommends not adding any fruit or any fruit of some sort. But if you're leaning more onto a sweeter side, which we are going to today, which is going to be a chocolate cake that we're making, then an apple or any added fruit would really add a lot of flavor. So A really great question that people may ask is what happens to the apple? Does the apple ruin? Does it turn black? Actually, it does not. It completely disappears after the full 5-day duration. It will completely disappear. You won't even notice that there was even an apple grated into it if the fermentation process goes correctly. So. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So right after this, what we're going to do is we're going to start on our cake for the day, and we're making a very delicious, very moist chocolate cake. So right after the break, we're going to do that. And now we're on to our cake making process using our sourdough discard. As you guys saw, we showed you how to remove the sourdough and feed it. And now we're gonna show you how to use your sourdough discard. So for that, what you're gonna need is some baking soda, salt, eggs, cocoa powder, some oil, milk, flour, sugar, and of course, our sourdough discard. So chef, let's start off by mixing everything together. And the things that you're gonna start mixing together are 3 different things. Your sourdough, so chef, could you grab a spatula? I would say, chef, this recipe kind of mimics, I don't know if you've watched Matilda before. Matilda the movie?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm sure everyone knows the part where the kid had to eat the chocolate cake.
Yeah.
So this looks like that chocolate cake. It's that like very scrumptious, really delicious. So what we're gonna do is mix together our sourdough discard, our flour, as well as milk, and all of that milk.
We can actually heat the milk a little bit.
You can
like,
heat it up.
Yeah, but not for, above 40 Celsius because it will kill the yeast.
Exactly. Anything above 40 degrees Celsius is going to kill your yeast, which is your sourdough. So you don't want to do that. So for this recipe, it takes a long time. So this recipe is for patient people only, because what's going to happen right now is we're going to mix everything together until everything is nice and homogeneous without over mixing, of course, and we're gonna let this ferment for around 2 to 3 hours. With heating up your milk, you can reduce that time. For us, our kitchen is just a little bit warm. We're gonna find a warmer spot and let that ferment for around 2 to 3 hours and mix the rest of the ingredients together. All right, so 2 to 3 hours have passed. We placed our sourdough together with the rest of the mixture, which is the milk and the flour, in a warm environment in our kitchen. What we're gonna do next is add in the rest of the ingredients to get our chocolate cake baking. So next, what we're gonna do is just sift in our cocoa powder. So chef, could you help me out with this? So this is Dutch processed cocoa powder, and Dutch processed is a really great quality for cocoa powder, so I highly recommend that you use that. So we're just gonna sip that in. Perfect. We're just gonna add in our baking soda, just like so. Up next is just a pinch of salt. And we're gonna give this a nice mix. So chef, could you help me out with this? There you go.
Can you mix it with this?
We could, yeah, I think it's better actually with that. Could you just scrape off any excess from here? I'll just use your whisk, chef. Give me 1 second. Yeah, I'll just scrape off any excess because that had a lot of cocoa powder on it. There you go. I'm gonna add in our sugar. Very gently. You're gonna start to notice that it's a very dry dough. So while we are mixing, what I'm gonna do is add in the rest of our ingredients, which is the oil.
We can mix it in a mixer also.
Yes, I think it is always better with a mixer. I just like hard work, so
Yeah.
I'm letting Chef Maryam work with us today.
This will help your
Muscles,
training.
exactly. Okay. And then don't forget your eggs. So this is not a very typical recipe for a cake. So just bear with us and it'll end up super amazing after it comes out of the oven. So once your cake batter looks like this, could we just pull it out just like that? You're good to go. You don't want any bigger lumps. You don't want any drier pieces. You just want to make sure that your dough is nice and liquidy, just like so. If it's tougher than this, it's not so good. So this is exactly the texture that you want. So
I think it will turn to a brownie texture if it is
more tougher than this.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You might end up with more of a brownie texture, exactly. So I have a baking tin over here that is lined with some parchment paper for easy release. I'm gonna pour this right into here and Chef is gonna help me pour it into our baking tin and pop this right into a preheated oven. So what I'm gonna do right now is just pop this into a preheated oven. Perfect. So this is gonna stay in our oven for around 45 minutes up to 50 minutes. It takes quite a long time. So just make sure that you're watching it from time to time. Make sure that it does not burn on the top. If it does, what you could do is cover it up with some aluminum foil. So we're just gonna keep it in our oven, and then meanwhile, what we're gonna do is work on our soaking liquid right after the break. Welcome back, everyone. So meanwhile your cake is in the oven, what we're gonna do is work on our soaking liquid. So soaking liquid is, I would say, unnecessary if you don't wanna add that extra liquid, extra flavor. In my opinion, it makes it even more delicious. So what we're gonna do is melt everything together to make a soaking liquid. So Chef, I know that you tried this recipe before at home. What do you think about this recipe with the addition of our soaking liquid?
It's more delicious.
Yes, exactly, I do agree. So for this recipe, what you're gonna need is some butter, sugar, cream, and some dark chocolate. So this recipe kind of is similar to a ganache, except we've got a larger amount of cream as compared to a recipe for a ganache. A ganache is going to be more stiffer. This is way more liquidy. What you want to do is ensure that this stays warm by the time that your cake comes out of the oven, because you want two things that are nice and warm for it to completely melt into the cake. So we're going to start off with our sauce pot right here, and we're going to pour our cream. So Chef, could you grab the sugar so we could pour or have it in together with our cream? Perfect. So what we're going to do is switch on the heat over here, and we're looking at medium heat. Let's give that a nice whisk. So this has come up to a boil. What I'm going to do is switch off the heat, bring our chocolate bits and pour this right on top. Chef, could you just whisk? Thank you. So we're just gonna slightly whisk everything together, just to make sure that everything is nice and homogeneous. So make sure that you always do this towards the end of your cooking process, because you really do want your liquid to be nice and warm while your cake is also nice and warm straight out of the oven. What this is going to do is just ensure that everything is nicely melted together. Perfect. So after noticing that all of that chocolate has melted in, what we're gonna do is just add in that butter and mix it through. And butter is also there to add more flavor. It's there to make sure that it solidifies once kept in a colder environment as well. So two things are gonna help with solidifying your liquid, your chocolate and your butter.
So the secret is butter.
The secret is butter. It's always butter. Perfect. Thank you so much, Chef. So we're gonna set this aside. What you could do is cover it up to keep it nice and warm. Once our cake is straight out of the oven, we're gonna poke some holes and get this nicely soaked into our cake. Welcome back, everyone. So our cake is now finally done. I'm gonna take it out of the oven. Looks perfect, and it's puffed up so much, and that's all thanks to the sourdough starter that we used.
Can you imagine?
Exactly, can you imagine? It's only because of your sourdough starter and just a touch of some baking soda that helped really rise your cake. So straight out of the oven, what you want to do is keep it nice and warm and give it a lot of pokes using a skewer. So just like so. This is also very therapeutic to do this. So you want to keep on doing this until you kind of cover up the full cake with a lot of holes. So meanwhile I do this, Chef, could you help me out by pouring just 1 spoon at a time of the soaking liquid? And what we're gonna do is just spread it around, let the cake gently soak it in. So this is, exactly, it smells beautiful, it smells amazing. So this is not your typical cake. Usually with typical cakes, you really don't want to poke any holes, but this is a very non-typical cake. As you saw from the very beginning, the batter was kind of different. The procedure of making the cake is not very typical, but turns out to be super awesome. Head done.
I will leave some for
the end for garnishing, yes.
Yeah.
I agree. So what we're gonna do is let this soak up. We're gonna slice a piece and then we're ready to serve. All right, so we left our cake to rest for just a little bit. Keep in mind, this is a very soaked cake. So just be careful. Your chocolate is gonna go everywhere, but it's a very delicious cake. So a quick tip for you to unmold is this. Grab a smaller bowl or something that is smaller for you to unmold your cake, and this is only for pans that are detachable. So what you want to do is just put this like that, push down the attachment just like so, and then what you're going to do is pull up the cake. Yes. So just very slightly. Let's shift it over here. Perfect. So it is a very moist cake. It contains a lot of chocolate, a lot of that soaking liquid, but super delicious, okay? What I'm gonna do is just cut a slice out of the cake, just like so. And that's gonna give you a really nice and clean cut. Chef, I'm just gonna need that plate from you, right in front over there. Yeah. Here you have your really awesome, very decadent chocolate cake.
now we can decorate it with more chocolate sauce as well.
Yes. Perfect. It looks awesome, looks very delicious. What I'm gonna do is just set this aside for now. And here we have a slice of our chocolate cake. Thank you so much, Chef, for being on this show. I really enjoyed my time together with you.
Thank you, Chef Manal, and thank you for having me in Jeka. And we hope to do more sourdoughs experiments.
Of course, I agree. So thank you guys for watching. This is our chocolate cake made from a sourdough from scratch. I'll see you guys next time on From Scratch.